The 1993 British Formula 3 Championship was pretty much a tale of two men and two teams, Kelvin Burt of Paul Stewart Racing and Oliver Gavin of Edenbridge. With the exception of round 2 at Thruxton, where Belgian Mark Goossens won for West Surrey Racing, Burt and Gavin hogged the top spot at every race. Both changed chassis during the season too. Gavin swapped his Ralt for a Dallara F393 after 4 rounds, and then won 4 races on a trot in it, so Kelvin followed suit and won 5 of the last 6 to take the title at a canter in the end. Class B was won by Jamie Spence, with 7 category wins, with 1992 Formula Renault winner Christian Horner taking 5 to finish runner-up. Down in Formula Ford, meanwhile, the Van Diemen team had hired Australian Russell Ingall away from German F3 to mount an assault on the title, and he duly did so, winning the season outright and taking the prestigious Formula Ford Festival ahead of Marc Genet, younger brother of F3000 driver Geordie, and future sports car driver Johnny Kane. British F2 continued to struggle with entries, averaging just 8 cars per race for its 10-race season. The season was dominated by Madgwick Motorsport, whose 2 drivers shared 8 of the race wins between them, Philippe Adams taking the first 4 races before having a huge falling out with the team and being replaced with fellow countryman Mika van Hoel, who won 3 of the next 4, with Team AJS's Argentine José Luis de Palma the only one preventing a clean sweep. Adams returned to the grid with Argo and won race 9, but he retired from the final race, leaving the way open for Van Hoel to take the title, but the other Belgian could only manage 4th, as De Palma took the win, so it was Philippe Adams who was the eventual winner. Ex-F1 hopeful Enrico Battaglia entered 3 races, coming second in the opening race, and French F3 driver Stéphane Grégoire had a go, but it was clear that the series was in deep trouble. Across in Germany, after dominating 1992 with Pedro Lamy at the wheel, Willy Weber's Opel Team WTS needed a new driver for 1993 and lit on hotly tipped Dutchman Jos Verstappen, managed by F1 dealmaker extraordinaire Hugh Brothengatter. He was a little slow off the mark, with Michael Krum, Sascha Maassen and US-German Markus Liesner sharing the wins around in the first 3 double-headers, but once he'd got his eye in, Verstappen swept the next 2 rounds at Wunstorf and the Norris Ring, then took 4 more wins to be crowned the first ever Dutch champion of German Formula 3. Despite only winning 1 race of the 20, Max Angelelli of the Works Volkswagen team took the runners-up spot on the base of greater consistency, edging out his teammate Sascha Maassen, who won 4. Roberto Colciago, who'd drawn attention at Macau last year for some rather premature starts, took a win, as did future tin top ace Jörg Müller, while other notable entries included Austrian Alexander Wurz making the move up from Formula Ford, and Gian Maria Regazzoni, son of 70s F1 star Clay, who later went into sports psychology and training and coached the Swiss-Italian team at whatever is going on here, some kind of business skills contest, I think. French F3, usually a solely francophone affair, had, of all things, an American on the grid in 1993, as Elton Julian made the move from British F3. Julian didn't win, but finished 3rd overall, as Didier Cottaz of Formula Project and Guillaume Gomez of the Winfield School team hoovered up all the laurels except for the brace of wins late on for Christophe Tissot of Promatechne. Gomez had been working his way up the ranks in F3 for the last couple of years, but it was Cottaz's championship this year, Formula Project's 2nd title following Eric Ellery's 1990 triumph. The Dallara F393 that had proved dominant in British F3 was triumphant on home ground too, with Christian Pescatori of the Supercars team taking the Italian F3 title on reliability despite only winning 1 of the 12 rounds, the 4th at Binetto. In fact, the wins were shared around pretty evenly, with nobody taking more than 2. In second was Brazilian Marcelo Ventre, another Dallara driver with no wins at all but 4 podiums and 3 poles. Giancarlo Fisichella, 3rd, won twice, as did German Michael Krum, who won the last 2 races but wasn't eligible for points. The Japanese F3000 series was one of the closest in years, with the top 3 just 1 point apart going into the last race in Suzuka. Kazuyoshi Hoshino led the standings by 32 to 29 from Eddie Irvine, with 2 wins to Eddie's 1, with Ross Cheever on 25 and Marco Apicella on 23, both still in with a title shout if they won. Hoshino retired from the last race, but it was Thomas Danielson who came through to take the win, with Cheever 2nd, Andrew Gilbert Scott 3rd, and Irvine back in 4th, his 3 points putting him level with Hoshino, but still 2nd on number of wins, and Cheever just a point behind the pair of them. The 1993 International F3000 series was a one-chassis series, though not by design. With Lola and Ralt having both pulled out, Reynard was now the only game in town, with a mixture of 92D and 93D models, though there was still some variety in engines, where the venerable Ford DFV was still found in several cars, along with the new lower-cranked Ford AC and its counterpart the Judd KV. The season opened with the Tom Wheatcroft Cup at Donington Park a couple of weeks after the rain-lashed F1 race, and in much better conditions. Monegasque Olivier Beretta, a protégé of Nelson Piquet, took pole and the win for Forti Corsi, chased all the way by Krypton's Pedro Lamy, the revelation of German F3 last year, with Olivier Panis taking third for Dams and Max Papis, Paul Stewart, and Giampiero Simoni the rest of the points. Driving his one and only F3000 race on that day, having come up through Formula Vauxhall Lotus and F2, was one Mark Albon, younger brother of touring car driver Nigel Albon, and thus uncle of F1's first Thai-flagged driver Alex Albon. Uncle Mark qualified 21st and didn't finish. 6 days later, everyone reconvened at Silverstone, and this time it was Gilles de Ferran of Paul Stewart's team, with the Pacific teams David Coulthard and Michael Bartels coming in second and third. French F3 champion Frank Lagorce taking fourth for Dams, Paul Stewart fifth again, and Olivier Panis taking the last point. And at the end of the month, it was the famous Pau Grand Prix, often a track where French drivers shine, but for the third race in a row the pole sitter won, and this time it was that man Lamy, the Portuguese driver, taking his first F3000 win ahead of the two Scots, Coulthard and Stewart, with Beretta the closest thing to a French driver in the points, finishing fourth, with Papis and Sosbury following. In fact, all 7 French drivers in the race retired. Panis and Lagorce, joined by Jérôme Polican, Jean-Christophe Bouillon, Emmanuel Collard, Ivan Müller and Eric Angevy. As it would turn out, this was the last race won by the venerable Ford DFV engine, and it was perhaps appropriate that it went to future Lotus driver Pedro Lamy, with the DFV having been originally built for Colin Chapman back in 1967. There was then a long gap until Enna Pergusa in mid-July, and this time it was a Pacific setting the pace, with Michael Bartels taking pole, but Coulthard the race after a fine battle with Lamy before he crashed, with Vincenzo Sosbury and Jérôme Polican taking the first podium for the Mythos and Omega Land teams respectively, and veteran Jan Lammers coming in fourth ahead of fellow F1 refugee Enrico Battaglia and Andrea Gilardi for Cobra Motorsports. So, 4 races gone, with 4 winners and 15 different point scorers. David Coulthard led in the standings with 1 win and 2 second places, but it was shaping up to be a pretty close season. Up next was a double-header in Germany, starting with a round at Hockenheim as a support race for the F1 boys. The Benetton Junior Il Barone Rampante team had overreached themselves a bit on the basis of success in 1991 and 92, and had been running 3 cars so far, but they slimmed down to 2 from here on, with the Vittorio Zoboli left without a seat when the music stopped. Pedro Lamy took pole, and things didn't improve for the Rampant Barons when Eric Angevy had a pretty scary role early on, but it was Olivier Panis in the Dams who came through to take his first win of the season ahead of Lamy, with Sosbury in third, Beretta fourth, Vortex's other driver Paolo Dellapane fifth, and Andrea Gilardi picking up another point in the Cobra. That was the end of Eric Angevy's season, as well as the team went down to a single car entry for Jan Lammers. On to the Nürburgring in August, and Panis had hit a rich vein of form, taking pole and becoming the first man to win 2 races in 1993, followed home by Gilles de Ferran and Alessandro Zampedri scoring his first points of the season. Pedro Lamy was 4th, which was enough to nudge him ahead of Coulthard into the overall lead, as the Scot failed to score, with Beretta and Sosbury picking up the rest of the points. After this race, from which Lammers retired, the Il Barone Rampante team shut up shop. Another support race came next at Spa, and as Alessandro Zanardi demolished his Lotus Formula 1 car, and himself, which would give Pedro Lamy his opportunity in F1, the Portuguese driver could still only manage 4th, as Olivier Panis took his 3rd win on the trot, again from pole and again followed home by Gilles de Ferran, with Coulthard 3rd, staying in touch with the leaders, and Sosbury and Stewart taking 5th and 6th, so they would go into the final double-header in France with Panis, Lamy and Coulthard all with a decent shout for the title, de Ferran coming up on the rails, and Beretta and Sosbury still mathematically in the hunt but looking rather unlikely. The Dams team had been expected to dominate on home tarmac at Magny-Cours and put Panis in the box seat for the title, but out of nowhere, the Appomattox team found some form, and Emmanuel Collard took pole. Panis got ahead at the start and led away until a rain shower sent everyone in to change tyres, and a stuck wheel nut cost Panis the lead. he could only trail in 10th as his teammate Frank Lagos took his first win in F3000, chased by Bouillon in the other Appomattox, Collard having retired. Pedro Lamy was third, closing to within a single point of Pani, and in fourth place there was another Frenchman, Nicolas Leboissetier, in his first F3000 race, having replaced Guido Knich, and just as in Spa, Sosbury and Stewart were 5th and 6th, which put paid to Sosbury's slim title chance, and likewise Olivier Beretta, who was 9th. Going into the last race at Nogaro, then, it was between Pani and Lamy, fresh from his encouraging but fruitless Lotus drive at Estoril, with David Coulthard still just about able to snatch the title if he won and the other two didn't score. Dams reasserted themselves as Lagos scorched around, setting what remains the all-time track record to take pole. Coulthard's title hopes were done after he retired on lap 1, but then, further round that same lap, Pani was torpedoed by Sosbury and taken out. The Frenchman had to be physically restrained from attacking the Italian and sat on the pit lane to morosely watch Lamy romp to the title, except that Lamy was soon in with suspension damage of his own and lost a lot of time in the pits while it was repaired. So Pani in the end cheered from the pit lane as Lagos took the win, followed by the Appomattox cars of Bouillon and Collard, Olivier Beretta, Ivan Muller taking his first points of the year, and Max Papis, the only non-francophone to score, with Lamy trailing in 16th. And so Pani took the title after all, and was being hotly tipped for a decent F1 drive in 1994, perhaps in the Benetton as Schumacher's number 2, while Lamy already had his seat. David Coulthard's Pacific team were entering F1-2 next year, though whether he would be driving remained uncertain, as he had also spent the year testing with Williams. The 10th edition of the Macau Grand Prix in its current Formula 3 regulations ended the season as usual, a few weeks after the F1 season wrapped up in Adelaide. Last year's winner, Ricard Riddell, was there with the Toms Toyotas, along with Dane Tom Christensen, Italian Alessandro Zampedri, and Japanese Hitoshi Mitsusada. Paul Stewart Racing were there with Kelvin Burt and German Sascha Maassen. Burt's British F3 opponent, Oliver Gavin, was the sole entry by Edenbridge Racing, and West Surrey Racing had their F3 lineup of Mark Goossens and Pedro de la Rosa. With Jörg Müller on pole for RSM Marco, the camera mounted on Austrian Philipp Peters de Lara accompanied him into an accident on lap 2, by which time both March racing cars of Warren Hughes and Jacques Villeneuve were already out. Mark Goossens hit a wall on the last lap of leg 1 as Müller led home from Sascha Maassen and Tom Christensen. Müller led away again for the second heat, and Pedro de la Rosa made a rather optimistic move on Gualter Salas and put it in the wall at the exact same place as teammate Goossens had, but nothing could trouble Müller as he came home to win the Macau Grand Prix with Tom Christensen over 25 seconds behind and Kelvin Burt third. Roberto Colciago was fourth, redeeming himself somewhat after his repeated jump starts last year. And so that was the scene among some of the more prominent junior Formula Series in 1993, plenty of close racing, and several soon-to-be-familiar names bubbling up. And that wraps up 1993 on the channel, but stay tuned for arguably the most controversial and dramatic F1 season of all time, 1994.